Sigue en sintonía de nuestra programación.
Está empezando el show del doctor Roy Aranda, donde abordaremos temas sobre separación niños de padres, casos de violencia, traumas con los indocumentados, cómo resistir ante tiempos de pandemias. Llámanos en vivo al 1-888-900-2811, extensión 6, y haz tus propias preguntas al aire. ¡Comenzamos!
Good evening, my dear Tribuna TV viewers. Buenas noches, queridos televidentes de la famosísima show Tribuna TV. Today is October 20. Es el día octubre 20 hoy. Tenemos un show basado en temas de educación para los jóvenes. We're doing a special show today dealing with education and the impact of poverty. I have a wonderful guest who I'll introduce momentarily today, Dr. Charles Merrill. And before I do that, I wanted to thank our producer, Oscar Luna. Oscar, si quieres hacer algún saludo. It's cold. Be careful with the cold. I'll certainly echo that. And I did want to indicate that Oscar is the producer, and he's the magician behind running the show and changing the slides and doing all the production. So I always am grateful to have him present. You can see Dr. Charles Merrill is on the screen. Momentarily, I will introduce him to you. I want to let the viewers know, quiero que sepan los televidentes, the show is being, it's live, it's being broadcast live, obviously, but it's also being recorded, and it's being recorded on YouTube. So it's going to be available immediately on YouTube after the show. And by tomorrow, it will be available on several other platforms, including Tribuna TV, Vimeo, and probably on several social media electronic platforms. I want to encourage the viewers, quiero sugerir a los televidentes that we are using several slides as usual. I think, for those of you who are regulars on the show, you know that I like to give some background information, and as we go forward, some recommendations that are hopefully helpful to the viewers. Feel free to take photos of the slides, and if not, you wait until you have the recorded version, and you can always take screenshots. Okay, so I do encourage you to do that, and you can have access to it anytime you want. Okay, so with that said, let me ask Oscar, por favor, slide number one. I want to give you an introduction to what we are doing today. So here, the show today, the impact of poverty on academic achievement. You can see my guest, Dr. Charles Merrill, and he and I will focus on the many ways poverty undermines academic performance. Children from poor families receive a poorer level of education compared to those who are financially well off. This is a topic that needs to be addressed with the viewers. COVID-19 has played a significant role in exacting a toll on children's education. I'm sure that you're all aware of this, and we've certainly talked about this on other shows before. However, it is far from the only issue impacting academic achievement. In fact, there are many issues that impact academic achievement that stem from poverty and the repercussions as a result of poverty. So this is something that we will focus on, and I have a wonderful guest for that today. It is our hope that we can provide useful educational information, resources to the viewers to help empower them. The show is dedicated to all families and children who have suffered from and endured academic hardships. Puede sacar el slide, por favor, Oscar, y poner el slide number 2. So I'm introducing our guest here, Dr. Charles Merrill. He is a psychoanalyst in private practice. He has a bachelor's degree in mathematics, a master's degree in theater, a master's degree in school psychology, a doctorate in clinical psychology, and postdoctoral training in psychoanalysis. In addition to his private practice, Dr. Merrill was a high school math teacher and then psychologist for the New York City Public Schools during a 35-year career. Dr. Merrill worked with age groups ranging from preschool through high school. I will share that my claim to fame, Charles, if I may just use first names, was that I actually trained to be a school psychologist initially at Brooklyn. And I did go through 1 year of the school psych program at Brooklyn, and then I transferred to graduate school of applied professional psychology in Rutgers as a doctoral student in school psych, where I did a year of very, very intense, a huge number of credits. I don't know how they allowed me to take that many credits. But more and more, I found that my pull was really moving more towards clinical. I did, however, get my certificate as a school psychologist in New Jersey and in New York. And I did work in a private school in Brooklyn, a private school, special ed, for 2 years. And I did work as a school psychologist in New Jersey for a short period of time, before moving on. So that's my claim to fame.
Private special ed school would be good
school psych and special ed.
Education.
So,
Special
Charles,
ed school would be good education.
welcome aboard, and please share with us, because obviously I abbreviated your background tremendously. So why don't you, if there's anything more that you'd like to let the viewers know or share, please do so before we go into the formal show.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction.
Let me just interrupt your record. By the way, I know Charles Merrill from the New York State Psychological Association. We have had multiple contacts through New York State Psychological Association, but it's always been through emails, and it's only been very recently, and it's been quite a while. I mean, it's been ongoing for quite a while.
Yes.
But he's always been very supportive, and I found his emails to be on point, very interesting and relevant. And finally, I said, "Hey, why don't you come on my show?" And he accepted, and we've been planning on this probably close to about 2 months.
Thanks for the invitation. What?
Probably about 2 months we've been planning on this, more or less, 2 to 3 months.
Yes.
So I'm sorry I interrupted you. Go ahead.
That's all right. I don't think there's a lot more to the introduction. I can now, again, I was 35 years with the board, both as a teacher, high school mathematics, and as a school psychologist. And I worked primarily with children from poor neighborhoods. That's what it was. I mean, I could go on if you want to put up the first slide, which is really where I'm headed now.
Okay, so let me just give the viewers an overview of what we'll be focusing on. Then we'll have a little bit of background in terms of statistics, which I always think is important for the viewers to have some idea of how pervasive a particular issue or problem is. And then we'll move on to the actual items that I got from Dr. Merrill himself, okay? So, por favor, Oscar, el número 3. So these are some of the issues that we're going to focus on. ¿Ya salió? How pervasive poverty is in America, urban and rural, how living in poverty impacts test scores, what it's like in the classroom for students born into poverty, what it's like for their teachers in the classroom, what it's like, what the federal government has done over the years about poor test scores, what students themselves told Dr. Merrill about their lives, and the false belief that charter schools can succeed while public schools fail. So that said, let's get into a little bit of the background. Oscar, por favor, saca el slide y pone el número 4. So I'm going to put up the slides. keep them up briefly, take them down, and then we'll add to the discussion. Statistics, this is a global. I'm giving you global number at the top. 265 million children out of school. 22% of them are primarily primary school age. Almost 12 million children in the United States were living in poverty. That's a 2020 statistic. 2/3 of family have difficulty making ends meet. COVID had a devastating impact on poverty. We've discussed this many times. I've given you some percentages of there. So it's pretty eye-opening when you consider the number of rural households that have had serious financial problems and for how many millions of students had to do virtual learning from home, the impact on those who are living in rural areas, the impact on communities of color. There I give you how many were actually logging on to remote learning. 60%, so that means 40% were not, or they didn't know how to do it, or their parents didn't know how to help them, or they didn't have the technological ability to do it. Predominantly Black and Hispanic students were affected. 1 in 4 Black children in New York City live in poverty, 1 in 3 Hispanics. This is from the Citizens Committee for Children of New York City. In 2018, approximately 12 million lived in poverty. That's almost 1 in 6. Census Bureau, about 25% of households with school-age children have medical bills they cannot pay. 9.3% of children, that's approximately close to 20%, public school students attend a rural school. Some problems that we're facing, accessibility difficulties, being able to get to the school or to access to the school or whatever resources are available to them. Funding limitations. Many don't have access to the internet or limited access to the internet. Same thing for cell phone service. Difficulty recruiting teachers and principals, and I'm going to assume other individuals connected with education and in schools. Aging buildings, infrastructure problems. You know, if you don't have heat in the building and you're supposed to be in the school, that's going to be a problem. If you don't have ventilation, that is going to be a problem. If the lights don't work, that's going to be a problem. Consequences, well, low performance, low level of concentration, many due to hunger, but not limited only to hunger. You know, it's obviously if you're cold or you're not feeling well or you have a health issue, it's going to affect your concentration. Social functioning is affected and physical health is compromised. Puedes sacar el slide. So, Charles, I said a mouthful on that first slide. Anything to add? And then after that, we're going to go into the poverty impacting test scores.
Well, there's not much to add. In fact, some of these statistics I will be repeating, but not many of them. I will just say that what I'm trying to encapsulate as I go through this is, given all of that, what it is like in the classroom for that child, given what's going on outside of school and given problems inside the school itself, and what it's like for the teacher having to manage the classroom and with the children having these kinds of challenges even before they arrive at school.
Okay, so por favor, Oscar número 5. So on your list, Charles, how living in poverty impacts test scores. So we can take that slide down, and I leave it to you to tell us.
Okay, fine. I worked primarily with children growing in poverty. Some were in foster care or living in a shelter. Little contact with one parent, a mother giving birth as a teen, moving multiple times in 5 years, chronic absenteeism, asthma, parent unemployed. Those were some of the issues, and other challenges. And these were part of many of their lives. I actually identified 23 different stressful conditions. Those were some of them, and there were others. One semester of the children referred to me because they were struggling in school, more than 50% of them were living with 7 or more of those conditions simultaneously. It isn't just that they were in a shelter. They were in a shelter, but their parent was incarcerated or something like that. They had to juggle all of these simultaneously. And I'm not suggesting that all poor children are living under such difficult conditions. And I'm not suggesting that all poor children do poorly in school. Some actually do very well. But I'm talking about those that don't. And it isn't just a few. There are millions of them. A good percentage of them are living under circumstances that by the time they arrive at school, they're shell-shocked. Sociologist William Julius Wilson has called them the, quote, truly disadvantaged, living in compact neighborhoods of extreme poverty. Now, that's city nationwide. If 25%, I think this is one of the statistics Roy gave, if 25% of the public school population in the entire city lives in poverty, that means the percent of students living in poverty in a school serving a poor neighborhood is double that. So that's 40, 50% in that particular school. In 2019, before the pandemic, in 9 cities, school districts, around 40% of the students in each of those districts were chronically absent. So a school has a population and 40% of the school is chronically absent. Chronically absent students miss lessons. Often they're absent because of other out-of-school stressors, so that when they do get back, they're anxious and confused. And this is not just a New York City problem. It isn't even an urban problem only. In 2015, in the US, there were 2.5 million children homeless for at least part of the year. In 2018, 16% of all children, around 12 million children, lived in poverty. 1 in 6 children is where I think mentioned. The Census Bureau reports roughly 25% of households with school-aged children can't pay their medical bills. In Los Angeles, 80% of the children attending public school live in poverty. 100,000 of them are learning English, so they're bilingual. And I'll just, as an aside, there's a distinction between dual language and bilingual. A dual language classroom is trying to educate in 2 languages. Children whose primary language is Spanish are trying to learn enough English so that they can then be educated in English. So all that goes along with that, they're also struggling to learn English as well. In rural Maine, an organization provides poor students on-site mental health care, dental care, staple food, and other activities. In rural Mississippi, mostly minority students attend schools with little funding, no air conditioning, mold, broken plumbing, and always a teacher shortage because the pay is so low. What is it like for these children in a classroom, asked to learn to read or discuss a book? Teaching elementary school serves these children. Teaching elementary school, serving these children, success is a Herculean task. think about high school. If you're teaching algebra, which I taught, it's a sequential topic, which means today's lesson builds on what you taught the day before or the day before that. If 40% of your class is chronically absent, when they come back, they will have missed what came before, and they're going to be frustrated and confused and demoralized. What is this like from the student's perspective? One semester, a class of 9th graders told me how that semester, and this was while I was still a teacher, along with my 4 math classes, I was assigned 1 English class. Nearly half the students teaching 9th grade, many chronically absent, making it difficult to teach a group lesson. So I came up with this idea. Write journals, I said, and I had to explain to them what a journal was and how to go about it. And I'll work with you on your journals. It increased motivation for some of them, and it gave them an opportunity for them to tell me what their lives were like. Here is an excerpt from one journal that semester. Quote, "Today is the hearing for my trial. I'm very scared because I was raped by my mother's stepbrother. I'm scared to go to court, but I'll feel better when I talk in the trial." Another student wrote, quote, "I am having problems at home with my mother. She keeps throwing me out. Yesterday, she said that she's not going to the wedding if I go to make one. Then she said for me and my fiance to get married this weekend at City Hall. The reason she is like this is because she said that since I fell in love with my fiance, I pay more attention to him than I do to her." 2 9th grade students in 1 class. A longitudinal study of 790 low-income first graders in Baltimore began in 1982, and it followed them for more than 20 years. By age 18, 40% of the girls had babies. And it doesn't stop there.
42% had been what?
No, 40% of the girls had babies.
Oh,
First graders in kindergarten in Baltimore, by the time they were 18, 40% of the girls in that group of 790 first graders had babies. And it doesn't stop with that. In Indianapolis, 1 in 3 adolescent girls who had babies between 2010 and 2012 were pregnant again within 18 months. These are school-age children. Before the Dobbs decision, there was a difference between how middle-class teens and pregnancy. If the adolescent and her family saw a future for them, including college, they saw pregnancy as an obstacle, and they were more likely to have an abortion. In an impoverished environment, not seeing college and careers likely, these teens imagine the baby will be a good thing for them. Maybe give them structure. I do have an example. I'm going to tell it very briefly. When I was a psychology intern at Columbia Presbyterian, as part of the crisis team, we met with a 16-year-old who was pregnant for the 3rd time. She had had 2 abortions because her mother said, "You can't live with me if you have that baby." But she was now pregnant for the 3rd time. And I invited the boyfriend. The boy was 18, living with his mother. She was 16. living with her boyfriend in, and said, she loves you, why don't you marry her? And he said, oh, well, she shouldn't get married until she graduates high school. I said, well, it's okay for her to have your baby before she graduates high school? And then he started giggling. What became clear was that she had the idea that if she had the baby, two people would love her, the boy and the baby. She just wanted to be loved. What is the impact, even on newborns, of being born into toxic environments? Dr. Jack Shonkoff, founder of Harvard Center on the Developing Child, argues that high-stress infancy affects the brain structures. Those individuals can remain on a hair trigger throughout life. They are so alert to danger. Again, let's say they were drug involved in utero, or there was just constant stress or yelling in the home while they were infants, starting then. They end up so alert to danger, they can't concentrate, and are so suspicious of others that they're prone to preemptive aggression, because it's as if they're soldiers back from the war. They rarely do well academically, and Shonkoff labels this toxic stress and believes that this toxic stress regenerates poverty generation after generation. If these kids grow up like this, what kind of parents are they likely to be? Bessel Wagner wrote a book, The Body Keeps the Score, which some of you may be familiar with. And he describes these students suffering trauma similar to veterans with PTSD. One study found that 50% of Head Start children have had 3 or more adverse childhood experiences from the ACE, the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, 3 of them by the time they're in Head Start. Incarcerated family members, depression, violence, abuse. As an illustration of what can happen, even if you weren't born into poverty. Schools now have active shooter drills. Well, imagine what it's like for a student, even one who hasn't gone through all of this growing up, to have an active shooter drill and then go back into the classroom and open up their history book or do geometry as if nothing stressful had occurred. And one child described that they went back to the class and a book dropped off the desk, and as it slammed against the floor, everyone in the class jumped. That's how stressed they are. And these are not kids going up. Now, back to my journal writing 9th graders. One described someone shooting out the window of a car, ending, I think people shouldn't do things like that. Another, who attended intermittently and rarely wrote, said, read my first one day. And he handed me an entry describing a friend who was killed when he fell subway cars. This is from his journal. This story I'm about to say is that it is true. The pieces of the body was taken out of the tracks. So they're going to have his funeral today. They are not going to open the box because he's in pieces. 9th grader. And again, all these journals, one class, one high school, one semester. In that longitudinal study of Baltimore first graders, by age 28, more than 10% of the males were incarcerated. And 26 of the children, among those they could locate, were dead by age 28. I know noted foster care as one of the blight. Less than 1 week ago, the New York Times reported that the child welfare problem is so severe now that the Biden administration is proposing spending billions of dollars just to facilitate kinship foster care rather than regular foster care. And I have an example of this. When I was a school psychologist, I was asked to evaluate a fourth grade girl who was in foster care, and she wasn't doing well. She'd been removed from an abusive home. In foster care placement, all she wanted to do was return to her mom. And so she was very difficult at home, and she was very difficult at school. And this is not atypical. Kids want to go back to their home and with their parents, even if it's an abusive parent. So they took her to a hospital, and a psychiatrist prescribed antipsychotic medication for her. What is it like for her sitting in that fourth grade class every day? And what's it like for the kid sitting next to her? And what's it like for the teacher trying to teach her and teach the other kids while she's in such distress? In New York City public schools, there are not enough staff to provide the emotional support for such large numbers of troubled students. Recognizing this desperate need, a privately funded program called Counseling in Schools was created almost 20 years ago, maybe more. And it brings privately funded counselors to help out because there's just not enough staff in the schools to handle all these kids. Handling all of them, but it helps a little. Much more is needed. There are occasionally a few children who thrive against all odds. Anthony James, in his book, The Invulnerable Child, describes the rare child that thrives. He's like a daisy that's coming out of a crack in the sidewalk. They're called invulnerable children. One of my English students was one of those. I'll call him Alex. Here is Alex's journal one day. My mind has been in a different world, a world of serious thoughts and ideas, where love is forever precious but seldom seen. A world of violence, hatred, and revenge. A world where a boy full of hopes and innocence is rottened, hardened, and transforms into a low-life, calculating man cascaded with crimes as his life grew and spun out of control. During this year, I changed 3 times, from slowly hardened to moderately hardened to extremely hardened. But I still push for supreme hardening and toughness. I'll stop there. Any comments, questions?
Well, a couple. You were talking about the the 17 and 18-year-olds who girls who had pregnancies and some that had more than one, and they were making a decision: is this something that's good for them or not? But in all cases, there was a choice to be made. At this point in time, with the reversal of Roe v. Wade, that choice is being taken away from them. And I have to believe, we don't have the statistics yet, but at least half the country has states that are eroding it. And these 17-year-old, 16, 15, 14-year-old girls are going to have to go through with the pregnancy, whether they like it or not, and or be criminalized. I'm sort of wondering what you might anticipate, in future journal writing. What they might say about this.
I don't know what happens. Again, If a kid is 14 or 15 years old, but they haven't been traumatized through all their growing up, they're going to have a problem, yes, if they're forced to carry that baby. My hunch is, and it's only a hunch, that if you're middle class or upper middle class, you'll navigate a way to terminate that pregnancy. I mean, I did mention, I prefaced this before Dobbs. What will happen to those children, I don't know. But whatever it is, they won't bring to the pregnancy, whether they carry it to term or not, the trauma of what happened to them from the day they were born. That one presumes and hopes that they're in environments. And I do have an example of that by comparing to a wealthier school district from a poorer school district, which is somewhere here in the talk. But I don't know. The truth is, I don't know. But my hunch is that most of them will either find a way to navigate it or they'll give it up for adoption. I don't know. But again, they and their families, if they're more structured with less trauma all their lives, they will navigate it in a healthier way. That's all.
But again, it does distinguish or differentiate families that are poorer, more limited, socioeconomically, and are unable to pick up and purchase a ticket to fly to New York and
That's right,
have
yes.
a procedure done in New York.
Well, there was an article in the Times about last week about someone exactly in that position, and she was able, through some furtive process, to get someone to sneak her a morning after pill. And it had to be because, in her story, she lived with an abusive husband and 3 children. And she actually described, if I have this 4th child, it's a death sentence. But she also knew if she traveled to another state, her husband would know she wasn't home when she was supposed to do, and he was an abusive husband. So she couldn't do that, even if she had the money. And so she found some way, in a sneaky, surreptitious way, to get pills. And how tragic that they're going to have to go through this, but that's what they'll have to do.
I think that the journaling is wonderful. I know that as a psychologist, I encourage journaling with my patients all the time, with some instruction. Usually the journaling that I do as a psychologist treating my patients is in some ways built on whatever the trauma is. If they were in a car accident or an occupational injury or some sort of a medical or handicapping kind of conditioning, the journal is going to be based on how,
Yes.
How are they handling their appointments? How are they handling their headaches? How are they handling lack of employment? So it's more and more targeted. Did you give any particular instructions or do you recommend teachers who do journaling to do that?
Here's the problem. And I'm going to talk about high school, which is where I taught. In the New York City public high school, there can be 35 children in a class, and you teach 5 classes. You have 150 students every day. Even with these children with their journals, I would comment, I would say things like, this must have been very difficult, I'm so good. But they have the time or energy with 150 students to be a counselor to them. I can refer them to a counselor, but the counselors themselves are overwhelmed because they're not handling 150, they're handling 1,000. And so everyone is overtaxed and overburdened. And that's just how it is. Yes, there's nothing wrong with inviting a teacher to have their children keep a journal, but I couldn't spend a lot of time with these kids. I couldn't. I have 150 students, and I got to teach their math lessons too. And that I can give you. These are now just some aside examples. in teaching high school math, one day there was a kid who had a big knife on his desk. He just left it open, young kid. And I went to his desk. I said, I'll call him Billy. I don't think you're supposed to have this here. Let me keep it at my desk and come up after the class, which I did, and came up after the class. And then I said, well, let's see. I will ask whether it's okay to give it back to you. I then informed the assistant principal or the counselor. They called the parent, and the child was hospitalized the next day. That I could do. But these things come up. And by the way, because I was training to be a psychoanalyst, I had some judgment to how to handle this with tact. If you got 150 kids and various things like this come up, it's not easy always to know a good way to handle this.
Has the environment, given what's going on sociopolitically, has the environment, and certainly in some of these schools, created more apprehensions due to potential violence risks and things like that? That's an issue?
It's always been an issue. I will say this. It had always been my sense that if an actual fight broke out in the classroom, it was because the teacher failed to find the right way to diffuse it. It's not up to the kid to diffuse it. It's up to the teacher. And I'm not suggesting it's always easy. Again, particularly if these kids come in after chronic absenteeism or who knows what was going on that morning at home. And there are not a lot of them, but again, they have one kid who's distressed, you can handle it. But suppose 5 of your kids in a classroom are like this, and 40% are chronically absent. Your wisdom and agility to handle all the various things that can come up are limited. It brings to mind, once I was observing a kid in an elementary school class, and he was always punching, and the kid next to him or something. And I watched, and I went over to one point and just invited him. The girl had accidentally poked him with a pencil, and he was ready to fight her. And I went over and I said, it was just an accident. And he gave her a little punch and then stopped. And so I went and complimented him, how wonderful it was that he didn't actually start a fight with her. But I was the psychologist sitting in. I wasn't the teacher trying to manage the whole class at the same time.
So
I can go to the next. Yeah.
Yeah, we've jumped a bit. So I wanted to ask you, because we got some sense of what it's been like for the students, and you mentioned one teacher, but in general, what's it been like for teachers?
Well, again, in New York City, 150 kids, there's a limit to what they can do. They can refer this to guidance counselor, but there's a limit to what the guidance counselor can do. And that's why this counseling in schools program came about, because at least it would offer a little more. I can describe what other schools have done and even what some charter schools have done, but let's get to that. But in advance of that, once this problem developed, and government do about it, what has been tried? And I'd like to go briefly through things that have been tried.
Sure, let's do that.
Okay. Politicians offered solutions. They blamed the public schools and their staffs, but they said they had solutions, and it got them elections by, blaming the schools. Well, how effective were the solutions that politicians came up with? Here's a brief review. The federal government enacted No Child Left Behind under the Bush administration in 2001. Within a few years, nearly every state was asking for a waiver. In 2013, Michael Petrilli, a former Bush administration official who helped promote the initiative, called it, quote, an unmitigated disaster. Common Core curriculum came next. That came in 2010. It established consistent nationwide educational criteria, and the goal was to hold the school districts accountable. A Common Core would measure how successful the school was at educating the kids. That'll fix it. Well, economically disadvantaged children still did poorly. Big surprise. For the politicians, that was proof to them that the schools in poor districts were lousy, their teachers were lousy, their principals were lousy or incompetent. Common Core was not a remedy, it was a cudgel. And state politicians didn't like it either. Texas Governor Greg Abbott rejected the Common Core curriculum from the start and called it, quote, a one-size-fits-all national standard pushed down from the top. So in 2015, the federal government tried something else, the Every Child Succeeds Act. And that allowed each state to set its own standards. So what did some of the states do? They lowered the standards for their states. So their kids performed better and they saw themselves as having succeeded. If a child is chronically absent, no curriculum is going to solve the problem. And remember, in 9 districts in New York City, 40% of the students were chronically absent. Same if a student is homeless. A curriculum is the impact of their being homeless. By 2019, the number of homeless students in New York City surpassed 100,000. So these are 100,000 kids living in shelters or moved around, and they're still going to school.
Charles, with the statistic of 40% of children being absent,
yeah,
I'm going to assume that that's probably actually a low statistic because you don't have the same 40% all the time that are not absent.
Yes.
So I'm sure
Well,
it's really a higher.
This is an aside. It's an aside, but I'll give you.
Okay.
As a math teacher in one semester, I was assigned to the truant program, they called it. They actually did something illegal. They put 60 kids, but it was never a problem because there were never, if you were lucky, there were 12 kids in the class, but it was a different 12 each day. But you certainly couldn't teach any, sequential lesson there. I won't go into the details. I could if I wanted to, but it was actually a wonderful learning experience for me. 57% of students without permanent homes graduate, compared to 80% of all city students. Students in shelters have the lowest graduation rates. Less than half complete high school. And it's not going to be fixed by the Common Core curriculum. A new problem arose in the last decade, in addition to all the opioid epidemic. What's it like in a home where adults are struggling just to take care of themselves? In Ohio in 2018, nearly 27,000 children were taken from their homes, with parental addiction the leading cause. In Tennessee, first graders are being trained on how to respond to adult overdoses. First graders. There have been over 400,000 opioid deaths so far in the United States. Add in deaths from other drugs, and the number may be double. How many school children have been impacted by these deaths? But the school attendance is still taken, and the standard test scores are still recorded. This is a brief aside. When I did teach in the New York City schools have what are called parent-teacher conferences. But because they know parents are working and they've got a difficult life, they always have parent-teacher conference, one in the afternoon and one in the evening. Despite that, if more than 30% of parents show up for parent-teacher conference, that's extraordinary. It's rare that it's as high as 30%. What about homes where
Charles,
parents? Yeah.
I have a number of patients who tell me that they, were proudly telling me that they attended parent-teacher conferences, and then I found out that they were Zoom. Do you see a difference in Zoom for a parent-teacher conference versus
that I can't address? No, if they're allowed to come both day or night and they don't come, they're not interested. As to what happens if it's Zoom, I can't tell you. I retired from the Board of Education over a decade ago, so I can't tell you how the Zoom, it might impact it, but my hunch is it's lack of motivation or interest. It isn't like if they were really interested in their kids, they'd come, or if they were motivated or they had the time, they would come, but it wasn't there. And this was before the pandemic.
I'm gratified that they have the interest and technological skill to attend a Zoom parent-teacher conference, because at least it shows that they're trying.
Yes.
They're interested, and they're in a position of, since they're able to do this, they're in a position of supervising and at least teaching their children how to get on via Zoom and or other electronic platforms.
That's a different issue. I'm not good at this myself. I'm not very tech savvy. And of course, you have your aide to help. I did not include shootings in my list of 23 adverse life experiences. In 2012, 312 Chicago public school students were shot, 24 fatally. In St. Louis, more than 11 children died by gunfire just during the summer of 2019. In one high school in Knoxville, Tennessee, one school, 5 children shot dead in the first 4 months of 2021 in one school. In the last decade, roughly 30,000 children and teenagers have been killed by gunfire. I don't know the number that were wounded. What are the effects of being shot on your standard test scores? What are the effects of being wounded? What are the effects of shootings or incarcerations on siblings, on friends, on relatives, on classmates of these victims? Exponentially larger number. But they still got to take the test and their score is recorded. Again, I'm not talking about all poor children, but I am talking about hundreds of thousands, if not millions, nationwide. This is an aside, but it's worth noting. They talk about the New York City schools as being awful. U.S. News and World Report every year lists the 100 highest performing high schools in the country. Nearly every year, 10 of the top 100 nationwide are New York City public high schools. There's several ways to measure how poverty impacts learning. One way is to compare a wealthier district to a poorer district. Let's look at a pair. Fairfield, Connecticut has a median income of $120,000. Nearly all students graduate high school on time. Bridgeport is next door, a much poorer district. About a third of the students did not graduate on time in 2016 when these statistics were. And keep in mind, Bridgeport, being a poorer district, spends less money per pupil than Fairfield. But the children in Bridgeport have dramatically more problems and issues than the children in Fairfield, but they're getting less money per pupil. And then in addition, in Fairfield, the PTA gives additional funds. A judge in Connecticut found the disparity in funding so great that he ordered the state to rethink how it funded schools. Not that they did. Yeah, the money comes based on the money from that school district. Now, that was comparing a wealthier district to a poorer district. Next, we can compare how do charter schools do compared to public schools. One of the most powerful arguments used to blame public schools that charter schools succeed. Let's look at one. Ever heard of Harlem Children's Zone? It has a national reputation in Harlem. It's revered. And you hear politicians, Harlem Children's Zone succeeds. Why the public schools aren't? How come Harlem Children's Zone is succeeding? Well, here's some facts contributing to their success. Harlem Children's Zone provides prenatal care to neighborhood parents. It provides parenting classes for new parents. And it has classes for 3-year-olds before pre-K. Many of the school's classrooms have young teacher assistants called, quote, peacemakers as additional support. Their classes generally have 2 licensed teachers, and their high school class has a 15-to-1 ratio. And remember, public schools, it's 34 at Harlem Children's. Well, how can they do that? Anyone know? Anyone want to raise their hand? I'll tell you. Here's the answer. In addition to public education funds, the school gets additional funding from foundations and Wall Street firms. Forbes magazine ranked Harlem Children's Zone 6th out of the 100 largest charities in 2016. Goldman Sachs pledged $20 million for new construction. Harlem Children's Zone deserves all the credit for courageously addressing the needs of poor minority students. Its founder, Jeffrey Canada, recognized that the neighborhood support system was essential, beginning with prenatal care, and he took his vision and created Harlem Children's Zone. I haven't heard any politician, let me know if you have, who has suggested funding public schools so they can provide the services that Harlem Children's Zone provides. It doesn't stop them from condemning the public schools because they don't do what Harlem Children's Zone does, but they forget to tell you that Harlem Children's Zone was 76 out of the 100 largest charities nationwide. Yet even with all that support, Harlem Children's Zone results are uneven. One year, an entire class of middle school students were dismissed as they were beginning to fund high school because their grades were too poor. They also learned that while support was needed before school began, they also recognized that the students needed support after they graduated high school and were going to college. So they fund a college success office, which continues to help them as they go through college. It's too long. There aren't enough statistics to determine how well they do in college. My hunch is they do better, but they may not, they still may, their adverse experiences remain large.
Charles, we're coming
Let
close
me
to
get
the
that.
end.
Oh, I'll do this one briefly. Success Academy is the other charter school that is touted. And they say we take the same kids that the public schools take because they use a lottery. Well, parents who are incarcerated or drug involved or homeless don't enter the lottery for their children. So they're already eliminated. In addition, public schools have to educate everyone. Success Academy can ease kids out. And one teacher even had what she called her got to go list of kids they would ease out. I'll stop there.
So we're coming to the end, but I wanted to go over. We've covered quite a number of the slides, so we'll jump to 11. Oscar, por favor, el número 11. I didn't want to stop you. You were on a roll. You gave us so much important information.
There's more I could give you, but I knew there wasn't enough time. But
I posited the question: is there a way of reversing the effects of poverty? And you already addressed some of these things: early intervention versus later intervention.
Well, I can give you something that has worked.
Yeah,
I just wanted.
Okay, advocacy, lobbying, improving parenting. These are things that we focus on. Support networks and resources. So, Oscar, puedes sacar a slide. And I just wanted to leave hopefully some positive things that the viewers can look at and or do. Puedes sacar a slide, Oscar.
I mean, I think parenting classes, which is what Harlem Children's Zone does, evidence, and a lot of people don't find this popular, actually giving money to poor households it takes some of the stress off of them. But if the parents themselves are overwhelmed, my hunch is there's a limit to how much they can do. I can give one example comes to mind. A kid was acting out and her mother was let out on parole early so she could attend his placement recommendation, and he was given some special ed services. And the spring came and she came back beaming. You've got to turn on TV tonight. My kid, I'll call him Sal. My kid Sal is going to be on TV tonight. And watch it, local TV on. And the title of the show was The Making of a Young Criminal. And he was at Spofford and he was 9 years old.
Wow. One of the resources that I hope that the viewers will appreciate and are aware of is actually this TV show, because I try to reach out as much as possible to the viewers along many different issues and themes, always ending with something
positive,
some effort or something that provides them with resources. And it's always my hope to empower them. I don't necessarily have answers. I don't know how to get more money channeled into certain areas, but I know that it's needed. And I know that you have politicians and there's lobbying and there's advocacy. There's ways of verbalizing what your needs are. Social media, meeting with your legislators, parent-teacher association. There have to be mechanisms that are there for parents and interested individuals, rather than just complaining about it and or not doing anything. I think you got to roll up your sleeves and do the fight. It may be difficult. You may not get what you want, but hopefully your voice will be heard somewhere down the road. I was very concerned about the Uvalde, and God bless the children and the victims, and the parents, to their credit, spoke out and spoke out and spoke out and lobbied and complained And finally, people are listening to them and things are being done. It's happening. We also have the Newtown, the horrors about the children, that the whole thing is a fake and lies and all that. It's horrible that people have to go through this, but it's better actually doing something and reaching out. And there's many support services, psychologists, other counselors, religious leaders, support service agencies, communities. There's many individuals that will gladly help to empower you. And I think that's important.
One of the things you touched on was getting parents to get more involved in their school, and anything that can facilitate getting more impoverished parents to be willing to go to the PTAs. I don't know how you facilitate that. Free meals, I don't know. Something that will motivate them to come to the schools would be very helpful.
All right. Let's put, Oscar, por favor, el último slide, el 12. There's some resources I just want to make available. I'm on the left. Dr. Aranda, Long Island Psychological. Dr. Peter Canaris, who's my consultant, is on the right, and underneath that, Dr. Charles Merrill. I provided a phone number and contact information through the internet for you. Save the Children. I thought that this was interesting. I got some of the statistics and some of the information directly from Save the Children. So I provided the reference and the website. Children International, that was another one that I got. I thought was very useful, and I got some good information from them. New York State Psychological Association. Charles and I both are members of NISPA. And it's the largest premier psychological association of New York, and it's one of the regional associations of the American Psychological Association right underneath that. I provided you with their new address for NISPA, phone number, and website. There's considerable information for the public. If you go to that website, you'll see that you don't have to be a member to get access to some of the information that's useful and helpful. And the same thing for APA. APA has tons of information. It's fairly user-friendly. You just have to use the search engine and type in whatever you're interested in. There's tons of material. Suffolk County Psychological Association. I'm a member. I live here in Suffolk. So there's their phone number and website. Westchester, just north of New York City, and I've given you access to the other regional psychological associations. Puedes sacar a slide. Charles, anything to add to that?
Well, I can just, in that list, I had mentioned earlier the counseling and school programs in New York City, which is privately funded. I'm pretty sure if you just Google it, Counseling in Schools, New York City, you can come up with that organization. And that would probably be a good organization to contribute to. Okay,
so that said, Charles, I'm very grateful for you to be here. I'm impressed. I always look at my shows as not only an opportunity for me to educate and empower the viewers, but it's also a learning experience for me. I have to spend a considerable amount of time researching each topic, and I'm delighted that you're literally a library of useful information. So you really helped out. It's amazing how much. I really hope that the viewers got a lot from it. I will encourage the viewers to listen to the recording. Focus on the parts that are of most greatest interest to you. The slides, there were not that many, but enough, I think, that covered some of the basic aspects that we were focusing on. And Charles, any parting comments?
Well, I just want to say that I'm grateful to you, Roy, for having me on and having the opportunity to share really experiences that I've had. I know there were statistics in there, but what I'd learned and being able to share it with you and with the listeners.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Oscar, my producer, I always ask him to say something, and I keep waiting for pupusas from him. Oscar? Stay warm and drink some hot cocoa. I'm grateful to Oscar for everything that he does to make this produce the show. And I wanted also to.
And I can add that tomorrow, if any members are NISPA members, they can go to the convention.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Just log into New York State Psychological Association. You can see all the wonderful things and programs that are taking place tomorrow. So that said, I wanted to thank the viewers who focused in on us. And if you were not able to, and even if you were able to, get a hold of the recording, take screenshots, make the show the links available to friends and or family members, colleagues, peers, whoever you think might benefit from it. I will certainly put it up on social media and several organizations that I am a member of. I'm grateful for the viewers who watch and chime in on a regular basis. We will have additional shows next month. I have a show geared up that will focus on personal injury, workers' compensation, no fault, things like that. Actually, with a doctor who specializes in physiatry, in these kinds of injuries, who will be a guest. So I will keep my viewers posted of that. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to listen. And to all my viewers, be safe. Be careful, be aware of your surroundings, be aware of the weather changes, be aware that COVID, as much as you may think that we're over the hump, I don't think we are. And even if you want to believe that we are, there's no reason why you don't want to be safe and exercise proper precautions and be careful not only about the new variants of COVID, but you got the flu, you got colds, you got a lot of things going on right now with the weather changes. And really be careful with all the issues that are coming up with increased violence. It is something that's serious. Violence is on the rise. Keep your wits about you. Be aware of your surroundings, your neighbors, your community. Do whatever you can to make sure you're safe and others around are safe. If you need to reach me, please do so. If you need professional assistance, please don't hesitate to contact me. Charles, again, I'm so grateful for you to be a guest today. Oscar, muchas gracias. To my viewers, thank you, and I will catch you in November. Wow, we're getting really close to the end of this year. So muchas gracias a todos. Thank you and good night.
Again, thank you. Bye.